The old van sat quietly behind the closed market, as if it were trying to hide from the world, just like the two souls living inside it. The morning was cold, the kind of cold that slid into the bones and stayed there, and the air around the van felt heavy. Inside, an elderly woman slowly opened her eyes, blinking at the faint light coming in through the cracked window. She moved gently so she wouldn't wake the little girl curled up beside her. Using her own thin coat as a blanket dotted 87, every movement came with a quiet ache, but she never complained. She looked at the small face next to her, peaceful and unaware of the world's harshness, and a warm feeling filled her chest. The girl was only 4 years old, full of trust and innocence, and she was the reason the grandmother woke up every morning with the strength to keep going. The rest of the world might have forgotten them, but they had each other. The van wasn't much. Half the lights didn't work, and the air smelled faintly of rust and old cardboard. But to them, it was the only place that felt safe. The grandmother reached over and brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. The child stirred, then slowly opened her eyes, blinking the same way her grandmother had. She smiled instantly, the bright, pure kind of smile that could soften even the hardest heart. "Is it morning?" The girl whispered. "It is," her grandmother replied, giving her a gentle nod. "A new day." The girl sat up and looked around the small space. To her, the van wasn't a sign of struggle. It was home. The grandmother wished she could keep that innocence forever, but she knew that children grow fast, and life had a way of teaching lessons far too early. "Can we play the song?" The girl asked, already reaching for the small keyboard sitting beside the old seat. It was missing several keys, and a few of the working ones made scratchy sounds, but it was their favorite thing. It was the last item the grandmother had managed to save before their lives fell apart. She had once loved music deeply, and she had passed that love to the little girl without even trying. "Let's play after breakfast," the grandmother said softly. There wasn't really breakfast. Just a few crackers and a small carton of milk they had saved from the day before. The girl didn't complain. She never did. She accepted whatever her grandmother gave her, trusting without question. As they shared the small meal, the grandmother kept her thoughts hidden. She tried not to think about the life she once had, a house full of warmth, a husband who loved her, a job that made her feel alive. She didn't allow those memories to surface too often. They hurt too deeply, like reopening an old wound. Instead, she focused on the present moment, on the tiny hands holding a cracker, on the hopeful eyes looking at her. After breakfast, the little girl pulled the keyboard onto her lap and switched it on. The sound was a little distorted, but she didn't care. She pressed 2 keys and giggled. The grandmother smiled too, a soft, tired smile, but real. "Can you play the one you taught me?" the girl asked. The grandmother hesitated. Her fingers were stiff in the morning, and the cold made it worse. But the girl's eyes shone with so much excitement that she couldn't say no. She placed her hands gently on the keyboard and began to play a slow, simple melody. Even with the broken keys, the tune carried a certain sadness and beauty. The girl listened, then tried to copy her grandmother's movements, tapping the keys with her tiny fingers. Sometimes she pressed the wrong one. Sometimes the key didn't work at all, but she kept trying. The grandmother guided her, not with harsh words or corrections, but with patience and warmth. "You're learning fast," she said. The girl beamed, proud of herself. They played for a while until the grandmother noticed how cold it was inside the van. The old heater had stopped working weeks ago, and the temperature was dropping more each day. "We should get moving," she said softly. "Keep ourselves warm." The girl nodded and set the keyboard aside. The grandmother wrapped her scarf around the child, then looked through the small bag of belongings they had. There wasn't much inside. The keyboard, a few clothes, a thin blanket. and a couple of small items that held memories she refused to let go of. They stepped out of the van, and the cold air hit them immediately. The grandmother held the child's hand tightly, guiding her through the empty market area. The world looked so different from behind the walls of their van. People rushed past on the main street, busy and unaware of the quiet story unfolding nearby. The grandmother didn't expect help from anyone. She had learned long ago not to rely on kindness. But she also knew that she had to stay hopeful for the girl's sake. The child needed to see light, not darkness. As they walked, the girl hummed the melody they had just played. Her voice was soft but cheerful, and the grandmother found herself humming along. For a moment, the cold didn't feel as harsh. They made their way to the nearby park, a place they often visited when the weather allowed. The park was simple trees, benches, a small fountain that hadn't worked in years. But it was open and peaceful, a place where the girl could breathe and run around without worry. As they arrived, the girl spotted something new. Near the center of the park stood a large wooden structure with a sign. Her eyes widened. "Look!" she shouted, pulling her grandmother's hand. It was a public piano, a real one, old, but standing proudly with a little sign inviting people to play. The girl ran ahead and pressed a key. The sound echoed through the park, clear, warm, much richer than the tiny keyboard they had at home. She pressed another key, and another, laughing with each note. Some people sitting nearby glanced over. A couple of them frowned at the sudden noise. The grandmother noticed and quickly stepped forward. "Come back here," she whispered, gently touching the girl's shoulder. "But it sounds so pretty," the girl said, her face full of wonder. "I know, my dear, but we don't want to bother anyone." She didn't want to attract attention. People could be cruel, and she didn't want anyone to look at her granddaughter with judgment or pity, but the girl was too fascinated. She pressed one more key, softly this time, as if testing whether it was allowed. A small group of park-goers looked over again. Some seemed annoyed. The grandmother's face warmed with embarrassment. She softly pulled the girl away from the piano. "Maybe later," she whispered. Just then, a man carrying a guitar case walked toward them. He looked like a volunteer musician preparing for an event. He had seen everything: the curiosity in the little girl's eyes, the hesitation in the grandmother's movements. "You can let her play," he said kindly. The grandmother turned, surprised. "Oh, we don't want to disturb anyone." "You're not disturbing anyone," he assured her. "The piano is here to be played. That's the whole point." The girl's eyes immediately brightened again. The grandmother wasn't sure. She didn't want to take advantage of kindness, but she also didn't want to dim the spark in the child's eyes. The musician smiled at the girl. "Go on," he encouraged. "Try it." Slowly, the grandmother placed her trembling hand on the piano, as if reminding herself how it felt. It had been years since she had touched a real instrument. The keys were smooth and cool beneath her fingers. The girl climbed onto the bench beside her, smiling up at her with excitement. The grandmother inhaled deeply, trying to calm the tremor in her hands. She played a single note first, then another. The sound was pure, carrying something gentle yet heavy, like a memory floating through the air. The girl watched closely. Then she placed her tiny fingers on the keys and pressed one that matched the tune. The grandmother looked at her, surprised, then touched another key. The girl followed again. They began to play together, slowly, softly. The grandmother's hands moved with experience, the girl's with innocence. The melody was simple, but there was a feeling in it that made people turn their heads. Bit by bit, a few people stopped walking. They listened. Something in the sound made them pause. Some didn't even know why, but the grandmother didn't notice them. She was focused on the little girl beside her, on the way her eyes lit up with each sound, on the way her tiny body leaned toward her as if soaking in the warmth of the moment. For a brief moment, the rest of the world disappeared. There were no cold mornings, no broken van, no worries waiting for them. There was only the music, the kind that came from the heart, the kind that didn't need perfect keys to be beautiful. And that moment became the beginning of something they never expected. The cold morning air settled around the park like a quiet blanket, and the grandmother could feel it sinking into her thin sweater as she sat beside the little girl on the piano bench. The melody they had played was still lingering in her ears, even though her fingers now rested still on the keys. For a moment, she didn't move. She simply breathed, letting the calm of the moment wash over her. The girl leaned against her, smiling up with pure excitement shining in her eyes. "Can we play more?" she whispered. The grandmother gently brushed the girl's cheek with the back of her hand. "We will," she said softly, "but let me rest a little first." They didn't know that their short duet had drawn the attention of several people passing through the park. Some stood quietly nearby, pretending not to look directly at them, but unable to walk away. The simple melody had carried something real, something that stirred a softness in the hearts of those who heard it. A man sitting on a bench nearby lowered his phone after recording a short clip. He didn't know why he felt moved, but something about the sight of an old woman and a tiny child playing together on a cold morning struck him deeply. The grandmother still wasn't aware of any of this. She had spent years learning to keep her eyes down, to avoid unwanted attention. She was used to blending into the background, unnoticed, unbothered. She looked past the small gathering without realizing they were watching her. The girl, however, noticed the people. She saw a woman smiling at her and shyly waved back. The woman lifted a hand in return, her eyes softening. "Grandma, people are listening." The girl whispered. The grandmother's heart sank a little. She didn't like being watched. It made her nervous, made her feel exposed. She gently placed her hand on the girl's back. "Let's take a break, my dear," she murmured. But before they could step away, the volunteer musician, the one with the guitar case, returned from setting up his equipment near the fountain. He had been checking cables and arranging chairs for a small music event scheduled for later that day. He approached the pair with a smile. "You two play beautifully together," he said in a polite, warm tone. The grandmother lowered her gaze slightly. "Thank you," she replied softly. "Do you both come here often?" he asked. The girl nodded instantly. "We come here to walk." "And I like the trees," she said, pointing toward a row of tall trees with bare branches. The musician chuckled. "Trees are nice," he agreed. The grandmother shifted her hands nervously. She wasn't used to casual conversation with strangers. She always felt a small fear inside, a quiet worry that someone might ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. "We just stopped to look," she said gently, almost as if apologizing. "There's no need to apologize," the musician replied. "That's what the piano is for. It's for anyone who feels like playing. And the way you played, it brought people together. That's what music is supposed to do." His words were sincere, but the grandmother only gave a small nod. She didn't want to explain anything. She didn't want to tell him why her hands shook or why her clothes looked worn. She didn't want pity. The musician sensed her hesitation and didn't push further. "Well, if you feel like playing again later, you're welcome to," he said kindly before walking back to his station. The girl watched him go, then looked up at her grandmother. "He's nice," she said. "Yes," the grandmother replied quietly. "He is." They left the piano and walked toward the empty fountain area, finding a spot where the sun was peeking through the branches. The grandmother sat on a cold stone bench, and the girl climbed onto her lap, wrapping her small arms around her waist. The girl's warmth made the grandmother feel strong again. "Did you like playing the big piano?" the grandmother asked. "Yes." The girl nodded eagerly. It sounds like the sky. Our little one sounds like a tiny bird, but this one sounds like the whole sky." The grandmother laughed softly. The girl had a way of describing things that always surprised her. "Well," the grandmother said, "maybe one day you'll play a piano even bigger than that one." The girl's eyes widened as she imagined a giant piano reaching up to the clouds. But the grandmother's smile slowly faded as reality settled back in. She didn't know what their future held. She didn't know if they would still have the van next week, or if they would be forced to find a new place to sleep. She didn't know where their next warm meal would come from. She didn't know if she could protect the girl from the hardships creeping closer each day. Still, she kept these thoughts deep inside. If she allowed fear to show, the girl would feel it too. And she didn't want that not for a child so young, so bright, so trusting. The little girl suddenly pointed toward the musician, who was now testing his guitar. "Can we listen?" she asked. "Of course," the grandmother replied. They sat quietly as he played a soft melody. More people gathered, waiting for the small event to begin. The grandmother realized they couldn't stay for long. Large crowds made her uncomfortable. But for now, the music was soothing, and the girl seemed to enjoy it as time passed. The grandmother's hands began to warm, and she felt a faint, unfamiliar sensation in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A tiny spark of hope, but then the wind picked up, colder than before. The girl shivered in her lap. The grandmother immediately took off her own scarf and wrapped it around the child. "Are you cold?" she asked. "A little," the girl said. The grandmother looked around the park. They couldn't stay out in the cold for too long. The van wasn't warm either, but at least they could shelter from the wind. "Let's walk a bit," the grandmother said softly. "It'll warm us up." They stood and walked along the paved path under the bare branches. The girl held the grandmother's fingers, swinging her hand playfully as they moved. "Can we go back to the piano later?" the girl asked. "We'll see," the grandmother replied. She didn't want to promise anything. Promises were dangerous when life was unpredictable. As they walked, the girl hummed the same tune they had played earlier. Her voice was soft, but the melody carried a sweetness that made the grandmother feel lighter. They reached the far side of the park, where a few children played with their parents. The girl watched them for a moment, her eyes following a small group chasing a bright red ball. The grandmother noticed the longing in her gaze. "Do you want to play?" she asked. The girl shook her head gently. "I like staying with you," she said. The grandmother's heart softened even more. She squeezed the girl's hand. After some time, they walked back toward the center of the park. More people had gathered now, and the music event was about to begin. Chairs were set out, and the musician stood near the microphone. The grandmother felt uneasy seeing the growing crowd. She didn't want to draw attention to themselves again. They quietly moved to the side, intending to leave. But as they passed the piano again, the girl slowed down. She reached out her hand and brushed a key gently, making a soft note ring out. The grandmother quickly looked around, afraid people might stare again. But no one reacted. Everyone was too focused on the event. The girl pressed another key, then another. Slowly, she began to tap a familiar pattern, the beginning of the melody they had played together. The grandmother felt a pull in her chest. She sat beside the girl on the bench. Her hands hovered over the keys before finally resting on them. She played a note. The girl smiled. They played together once more, this time quieter, more careful. But the melody still bloomed between them, gentle and full of emotion. A few people standing near the back heard the soft tune and turned their heads. Something about the sound made them pause. The grandmother didn't notice. She was too lost in the moment, too wrapped in the music and the warmth of the child beside her. But the musician noticed. From the stage, he watched them with a thoughtful expression. He had seen many performers over the years, students, professionals, street artists, but there was something different about the old woman's playing. Something honest. Something that carried a lifetime of stories. When the song ended, the girl looked up at her grandmother, her eyes shining. "That was nice," she whispered. "It was," the grandmother said. They got up from the bench, ready to leave. When the musician approached them again, "Excuse me," he said gently. "I know you may not want attention, but would you be willing to play again later? Maybe after the event? People would love to hear you." The grandmother shook her head quickly. "Oh, no, no, thank you. We were just playing for ourselves." "I understand," the musician replied softly. "But if you change your mind, I'd be honored." He stepped back, giving them space. The grandmother turned to the girl. "Let's go now," she said. The girl nodded, slipping her tiny hand into the grandmother's. They walked away slowly, leaving the piano behind, but the melody they had played stayed in the air like a quiet echo. Little did they know, this small moment, this simple morning in the park, was setting the stage for something bigger, something that would touch lives far beyond their own. The light in the park began to change as the morning slowly drifted toward noon. The sun, though weak, made a soft path across the ground, and the breeze carried a mix of sounds, children laughing in the distance, leaves brushing against each other, and the faint hum of the musician preparing for his small event. But the grandmother and the little girl walked quietly along the stone path, their steps slow and gentle, as if they were moving through a different world than everyone else. The grandmother could still feel the piano keys under her fingers. Even though she had played only a simple melody, it had stirred something inside her, something she thought had disappeared a long time ago. She held the little girl's hand firmly, as if grounding herself. "Grandma," the girl said suddenly, looking up with curious eyes, "why did you stop playing long ago?" The grandmother stiffened a little. She didn't like thinking about the past. It felt too heavy, too filled with moments she wasn't ready to reopen. She sighed softly. "Life changed, my dear," she whispered. "Sometimes life takes a different path, and we just walk along with it." The girl didn't fully understand, but she nodded as if she did. Children didn't need long explanations. Sometimes they only needed the gentleness in a person's voice to feel safe. They reached a quiet corner of the park, away from the gathering crowd. The grandmother sat down on an old bench, and the girl climbed onto her lap, resting her head against her chest. The grandmother wrapped her arms around her, breathing slowly, letting the moment settle. She watched a squirrel dart across the grass, searching for food. Even the small creature seemed to be fighting its own little battles for survival. The grandmother felt a strange bond with it. Life, she thought, was full of quiet struggles, some visible, some hidden deep within. The little girl played with the edge of the scarf wrapped around her. "Grandma," she whispered again, "do you think the big piano will still be there tomorrow?" "I hope so," the grandmother said softly. She didn't want to make promises. Not when life was uncertain. But she wished for it, wished for something steady the girl could hold on to. After a few minutes, the girl hopped off her lap and began to explore a small patch of grass nearby. She picked up fallen leaves, holding them up like treasures. The grandmother watched her with a fond smile. The girl ran back with 2 leaves in her hands, one large and one small. "This one is you," she said, showing the bigger leaf. "And this one is me." The grandmother chuckled. "Why am I the big one?" "Because you protect me," the girl said simply. The grandmother's chest tightened with emotion. She pulled the girl close and kissed the top of her head. They sat together for a while, enjoying the quiet. Then, from the center of the park, applause broke out. The music event had begun. The grandmother glanced in that direction, but didn't feel the need to join. She preferred to stay in the quiet corner, but the girl looked curious, listening to the faint sound of the guitar. "Can we go see?" she asked. The grandmother hesitated. She didn't like crowds, but she also didn't want to hold the little girl back. "All right," she finally said, "but we'll stay at the edge." They walked slowly toward the fountain, where the chairs were set up. People filled nearly every seat, some standing around the edges. The musician strummed his guitar, singing softly into the microphone. His voice was gentle and warm, like a calm river. The grandmother and the girl stood behind the crowd. The girl listened with wide eyes, swaying a little to the rhythm. The grandmother kept her hand on the girl's shoulder. As the song ended, the musician looked out at the people and smiled. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "Music is a gift. It connects us in ways we don't always understand." The grandmother glanced at the girl. She could see the excitement shining in her eyes, the same excitement she felt earlier while touching the piano. The musician played a few more songs. The girl clapped softly after each one, though her small hands made only a faint sound. The grandmother smiled at her enthusiasm. After a while, the girl tugged on the grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma, do you think people liked our song too?" The grandmother's breath caught. She looked at the girl's hopeful face. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think they did." "But they didn't hear it," the girl said. The grandmother shook her head gently. "Maybe they didn't hear all of it. But music has a way of reaching people, even if they don't know where it comes from." The girl seemed satisfied with this answer. She leaned against the grandmother's side, humming again. Just then, a small group of people moved aside, creating a little gap between the crowd. The grandmother could see the piano again from where they stood. It sat quietly, waiting. The little girl noticed it too. She tugged on her grandmother's hand. "Grandma, can we play a little more?" The grandmother hesitated. She didn't want to disturb anyone. But the event was going on, and people were focused on the stage. Maybe no one would notice. She looked down at the girl's hopeful eyes and felt her heart soften. "All right," she whispered. They walked carefully to the piano. The grandmother sat down slowly, feeling the cold wood beneath her. The girl climbed onto the bench beside her again. The grandmother placed her fingers on the keys, but didn't press them yet. She looked at the girl. "What would you like to play?" she asked softly. The girl tapped the grandmother's hand lightly. "The same one. The one that sounds like a warm blanket." The grandmother laughed softly. "All right then." She pressed the first key. The sound floated gently into the air. The girl followed, pressing a key right after her. They played slowly, letting each note breathe. There was no rush, no audience to impress. Just a grandmother and a child sharing a quiet moment. But the melody carried a softness that drew people in. A few listeners at the back of the event turned their heads. They heard the familiar tune the grandmother had played earlier. Some paused. Some smiled. Some felt a strange emotion rising inside them. The musician on stage noticed too. His fingers slowed for a moment, and he looked over. A gentle expression crossed his face. He knew that kind of music, the kind that didn't come from training or performance, but from life itself. The grandmother and the girl played on, unaware of the attention drifting toward them. When the song ended, the girl leaned against her grandmother and sighed happily. "I like playing with you," she whispered, "and I like playing with you." The grandmother replied softly. They stood up, ready to walk away from the piano again. But this time, someone approached them. It was a woman, perhaps in her 50s, holding a warm drink in her hands. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." The grandmother froze for a moment, her heart beating a little faster. She wasn't used to strangers talking to her. The woman continued, "I just wanted to say, your music was beautiful, truly beautiful." I haven't heard something that heartfelt in a long time." The grandmother lowered her gaze. "Thank you," she said quietly. "And your granddaughter," the woman added, smiling at the girl. "She plays with such sweetness. You two make a lovely pair." The girl beamed at the compliment. The grandmother didn't know what to say. She simply nodded. The woman hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. "If you don't mind me asking, did you ever teach music?" The grandmother's breath caught. She didn't expect that question. "Long ago," she said softly. The woman nodded thoughtfully. "I could tell. Your hands move like someone who has taught many others." The grandmother felt her heart tighten. She wasn't sure if she wanted this conversation. She wasn't sure if she could open up. The woman didn't push. She simply smiled warmly. "Well, I just wanted to say thank you. Your music added something special to this morning." With that, she walked away, returning to the event. The grandmother stood still for a few seconds, unsure how to feel. The girl tugged her sleeve. "Grandma, she liked our song," she said. "Yes," the grandmother whispered. "She did." The girl wrapped her arms around the grandmother's waist. "Do you think more people liked it?" The grandmother thought about the people who turned their heads, the soft smiles she had seen. "Maybe," she said gently. They moved away from the piano, standing near a tree where the crowd thinned out. The grandmother felt a mix of emotions: nervousness, surprise, and a faint glow of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, not pride in herself, but pride in the little girl who brought light into every moment. Time passed slowly. The music event continued, and the sun climbed a little higher. The grandmother and the girl sat together under the tree, watching other performers come and go. At one point, a teenager played a quick, lively piano piece that made the crowd cheer. The grandmother watched with a small smile. It reminded her of days long gone. The girl listened too, her head slightly tilted. "He plays fast," she whispered. "Yes, he does," the grandmother replied. "Do you play fast too?" the girl asked. A soft sadness crossed the grandmother's face. "I used to," she whispered. The girl reached for the grandmother's hand. "Maybe you can again." The grandmother looked at her, surprised by the simple confidence in her voice. "Maybe," she said quietly. As the event came to an end, people began to leave the park, chatting and smiling. The grandmother stood up and helped the girl to her feet. "Come, my dear," she said. "We should get going." They started walking toward the exit of the park. The girl glanced back at the piano one last time, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to play again. The grandmother noticed and smiled. "We'll come back," she said softly. The morning after their unexpected duet in the park, the air felt a little different for the old woman and the small girl. It was still cold, and their clothes were still thin, but something inside the old woman felt strangely warm. She had not felt that softness in a long time. It was not the weather. It was the feeling of being seen again. Even if only for a few minutes, they spent the night inside the small shelter that volunteers had arranged for them. It was not a real home, but it had heat, a door that locked, and 2 clean blankets. The girl fell asleep quickly, curled against the old woman like a little bird trying to hide from the world. But the old woman stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. So many thoughts filled her mind that she could not rest. She kept thinking about the crowd, the soft clapping, the way people had looked at them. For years, she had avoided attention. She believed that without a home, without proper clothes, without a place to belong, she should not be seen. But in the moment she placed her fingers on the piano keys, she forgot all of that. The music had taken her back to a time when she stood tall, when she had dreams and students and a small house filled with laughter. She did not know why she had played so openly. Maybe it was because the little girl had wanted to. Maybe it was because the cold morning had softened something inside her. Maybe it was because her heart, tired as it was, needed to speak one more time. When the girl woke up, she stretched and smiled as if the world was brand new. The old woman gently brushed the girl's hair and tried her best to make it neat. She did not have many things left in life, but she still carried small habits of care. The girl asked about the piano. She asked if they could play again that day. The old woman hesitated, unsure if they were welcome. But before she could answer, the door opened, and the same woman from the park stepped inside holding 2 warm cups of tea. The memory of the night before flashed into the old woman's mind. She remembered the woman's surprised expression when she found out they lived in a van. She remembered her gentle voice and her promise to help them. The woman came closer, placed the tea on the small table, and smiled warmly. She said she was glad they stayed the night. Then she explained something the old woman never expected to hear. She told her that the video of their duet had been posted online by someone in the crowd, and it was already being shared by many people. She said people were leaving comments, saying the music felt pure and full of love. The old woman lifted her hand to her chest. She had never imagined something like this. She had lived so quietly in the shadows that the idea of people knowing her story felt unreal. The woman then told her there was a place she wanted to take them. She explained that she managed a community art center, and she believed the old woman might feel safe there. The old woman tried to protest, but the woman gently assured her there was no pressure. It was only a visit. Nothing more. The old woman looked down at the little girl, who was staring at the tea with excitement. The girl nodded eagerly, even though she did not fully understand what was happening. Her joy was simple. Anywhere warm and friendly meant everything to her. They dressed, gathered their small bundle of things, and followed the woman outside. The sun was still low, painting the sky with soft colors. The old woman walked slowly, careful with each step. Her joints always felt stiff in the morning, but she refused to let that stop her. The art center was not too far. It was a large building with wide windows and colorful posters displayed at the entrance. Children and older people walked in and out, holding instrument cases, paintbrushes, and notebooks. The old woman felt shy stepping through the doors, but the woman guiding them stayed at their side the whole time. Inside, there were wide halls filled with art and sounds. A group of children practiced dance steps in one room. In another room, someone sang softly while a teacher corrected their notes. Everything felt alive. Everything felt warm. The woman led them into a music room with a large piano sitting at the center. The girl ran toward it without fear, touching the keys with the same innocent excitement she had shown at the park. The sound echoed in the room, soft but clear. The old woman stood beside the piano, unsure if she should touch it. She did not feel worthy. She had lost so much in life that she believed she no longer had the right to step back into places like this. The woman gently encouraged her to try. She insisted there was no audience here, only a safe place. Only people who respected her. The old woman's hand shook a little as she lifted it toward the keys. She pressed one softly, then another. The sound filled the room, rich and familiar. She sat down slowly on the bench. Her back straightened without her noticing. Her fingers began to move on their own, remembering something from a long time ago. The girl climbed onto the bench beside her, and the old woman paused to give her space. Then she began to play a simple tune so the girl could follow. The girl's small fingers tried to copy, creating a beautiful mix of gentle notes and innocent mistakes. Few students walking by heard the music and stopped outside the room. They watched quietly, moved by the scene. The old woman did not even see them. She was lost in the sound, lost in a moment she thought she would never feel again. When she finished, the room fell silent. The girl looked up with a bright smile, as if she had just finished something grand. The old woman looked around, surprised to see a small group standing at the doorway, their faces soft with admiration. The woman from the park wiped her eyes, touched by the moment. She told the old woman that she had a gift, one that should not be hidden by fear, age, or hardship. She spoke gently but firmly, as if she truly believed every word she said. Then she said something the old woman never expected. She asked if the old woman would consider teaching some simple piano classes at the center. She said the students would love to learn from someone with such genuine emotion in her playing. She also explained that the center could offer a small private room for them to stay in for a while. It was not much, but it was warm and safe. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. She tried hard to hold back. She looked down at the little girl, who was now tapping random keys with delight. The girl did not understand the depth of what was happening, but she sensed something good. The old woman took a slow breath. She was afraid. Afraid to hope. Afraid to accept anything that could later be taken away. Life had taught her not to trust good things so easily. But then she looked at the girl again. That innocent face had slept in a cold van too many nights. That small body had waited through too many hungry evenings. The old woman felt a sudden strength rise within her, a strength she thought she had lost. She nodded. The woman smiled with relief. The small group in the doorway clapped softly. The girl laughed, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. That afternoon, the center arranged a simple meal for them. They sat around a small table, eating soup and bread. The old woman watched the girl enjoy every bite. She had seen her eat quietly many times before, but today there was something different in her eyes. Something light, something hopeful. The old woman felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She did not know what the future held. She did not know if she could truly teach again. But for the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, things were beginning to change. She looked at the piano once more before leaving the room. The keys seemed to shine warmly, almost like they were welcoming her back. The little girl tugged at her hand, asking if they could come again tomorrow. The old woman smiled softly, squeezed her hand, and whispered yes. The days that followed felt different for the old woman and the little girl. For the first time in a long while, mornings did not begin with fear or uncertainty. Instead, they woke in a small room inside the art center, a place that was warm, safe, and filled with gentle sounds of people practicing music or chatting in the hallway. The girl especially loved waking up there. She would sit up, rub her eyes, and smile as if each day was a surprise. The old woman still felt shy about staying in the room provided to them. She worried someone would say they didn't belong there, or that they were taking too much space. But every person who passed them in the hallway greeted them kindly. Some waved, some nodded, and some even asked how they were settling in. These simple gestures softened something inside her that had been stiff for many years. The woman who ran the center visited them often. She checked on the old woman's health, asked if they needed anything, and reassured her that the room was theirs for as long as they needed. She also reminded her gently that there was no hurry to begin teaching. She wanted the old woman to rest first, to feel stable before taking any big steps. But resting was not easy for the old woman. Her mind was always busy. She kept thinking about how she could repay the kindness they received. She did not want to be a burden. She wanted to feel useful again. She wanted to contribute something, even if it was small. One morning, the woman from the park brought her a list of students who wanted to take simple piano classes. She explained that the lessons could start whenever the old woman was ready. She also said the center had arranged for the girl to join early music activities, so she could learn and play with other children. The old woman hesitated. She had not taught anyone in decades. She wondered if her hands would tremble too much, or if her voice would shake when she spoke. But then she looked at the girl sitting beside her, swinging her legs happily, and she felt a soft push inside her heart. She agreed to start slowly. Her first class took place in a small practice room with a bright window and a well-kept piano. 3 students entered quietly. They looked at her with gentle curiosity. The old woman smiled shyly, not sure if her words would come out smoothly, but as soon as she placed her fingers on the keys, something inside her settled. Her voice grew steady. Her hands moved with confidence. Her lessons were simple, patient, and filled with warmth. She did not rush the students. She did not speak like someone trying to impress. She simply shared what she knew from the deepest parts of her life. The students listened closely. They admired her calm way of teaching, the softness of her words, and the care she put into every instruction. By the end of the lesson, they clapped quietly, and the old woman felt a small glow in her chest, something she had forgotten long ago. Meanwhile, the little girl spent time in the beginners group with other children. She was shy at first, holding on to the old woman's clothes before entering the classroom. But the teachers were kind. They gave her small instruments to shake, tap, and explore. She slowly grew comfortable, smiling more each day. Her favorite part, of course, was the grand piano in the main hall. She would run to it whenever she had the chance, touching the keys gently as if they were tiny stars. Sometimes she sat beside the old woman after her class and copied whatever melody she heard. The staff and students at the center adored the girl quickly. She was small, innocent, and full of curiosity. Her laughter brightened the halls. Sometimes she would wander into a dance class and watch silently from the door, or she would sit near painters and stare at their colors with wide eyes. But the person she adored the most was still the old woman. She watched her teach, watched her play, watched her move with a kind of grace that came from years of love and loss. The girl did not understand everything happening around her, but she sensed that they were finally in a place where voices were gentle and hands were helpful. One afternoon, after her classes ended, the old woman sat alone in the music room. She placed her hands on the piano keys and closed her eyes. Memories rose inside her, old memories she had buried deep. Clear moments of her standing in front of her own students many years ago. The sound of her husband laughing from the kitchen. The smell of her old home. The way her life used to feel full. She opened her eyes again, realizing something she hadn't felt in a long time. She had missed this life. She had missed belonging somewhere. The woman from the center came in quietly and sat beside her. She didn't speak at first. She simply listened to the faint notes the old woman played. Then she gently asked how she was feeling. The old woman admitted that she felt strange. She said she was grateful, but she still worried that everything might disappear again. She was afraid to grow attached to this new life. The woman understood. She told her that fear was normal after everything she had gone through. She explained that healing takes time, just like learning music does. She placed a calming hand on the old woman's shoulder and reminded her that she was not alone. The center was not just a building. It was a community of people who cared. And they cared about her. The old woman looked down, touched by the words. She swallowed slowly and nodded. As the weeks passed, her bond with the students grew stronger. They admired her patience. They respected her gentle nature. Some parents came to watch their children learn, and they thanked the old woman for bringing kindness into the lessons. Their words often made her eyes shine with soft tears. The girl continued to grow in confidence too. She learned small rhythms and simple melodies. She played a little out of tune sometimes, but no one minded. Her joy mattered more than anything. She and the old woman played small duets almost every day. They sat side by side, their hands moving in different sizes, but with the same shared heart. One day, the center organized a small afternoon gathering for families and students. Tables were set up with snacks. Children shared little performances. Teachers introduced their work. When it was time for the old woman's class to present something, her students played a simple tune they had been practicing. They were nervous, but they did well. Parents clapped, teachers clapped, and the old woman bowed slightly. Her face red with modesty. Then, without anyone asking, the little girl walked up to the piano and tapped it lightly. The old woman reached for her, thinking she wanted to go home, but the girl shook her head. She wanted to play. The room fell quiet. The old woman sat beside her, not knowing what the girl planned to do. But the girl placed her fingers on the keys and looked up with an expression that said she wanted to try. The old woman smiled softly and played a familiar melody, one they practiced together every evening. The girl joined in. Her small hands created simple notes that blended beautifully with the old woman's skilled playing. The room became silent, then warm. People felt the sincerity in the music. They saw the bond between the two. Some covered their mouths. Some wiped their eyes. When the duet ended, the room filled with gentle applause. The girl giggled, and the old woman hugged her close. She could not stop smiling. After the event, several people approached the old woman and thanked her again. Some asked her to teach more classes. Some simply said they were moved by the duet. She felt overwhelmed but grateful. Later that evening, she walked back to their small room, holding the girl's hand. The sun had set, and the hallway lights glowed softly. The girl hummed the tune they had played, skipping a little with each step. The old woman slowed down and looked around the center of the walls filled with art. The soft sound of music still echoing from a distant room. The warmth of people passing by. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere again. And she felt something deeper too, a sense that this place, this community, this gentle chapter of their life, might be the beginning of something they never expected, a real home. The weeks slowly turned into months, and life at the center settled into a calm rhythm for the old woman and the little girl. Each day began with the soft hum of music echoing in the hallways. Some mornings brought the sound of a violin warming up. Other mornings brought the tapping of dance shoes from the room next door. The girl loved it all. She would wake early, peek out the door, and listen to the world waking up around her. The old woman grew more comfortable with her classes. What started as small groups turned into slightly larger ones. Parents would sometimes wait outside the room, listening with warm smiles as their children learned to press each piano key with care. Some days, the old woman caught herself smiling too, surprised at how natural teaching felt again. It was as if the years of silence had not taken her gift away. They had only made her. Appreciation for it deeper. The girl continued learning as well. Her tiny fingers had grown stronger. She could now play a small tune without stopping, and her confidence made her glow. Sometimes she would run to the old woman after class, excited to show a new rhythm she had learned. The old woman watched her with quiet pride, feeling something she thought she would never feel again, the feeling of watching a future slowly building. One afternoon, the woman who managed the center came to them with an excited expression. She held the phone in her hand and explained that something unexpected had happened. She told the old woman that the video of their little duet in the park months ago had started spreading across the internet again. It had reached thousands, then tens of thousands, and soon it had crossed far beyond that. People everywhere were sharing it. They said the video reminded them of kindness, of family, of simple beauty in a world that often felt cold. Some wrote long messages explaining how the music had touched them. Some said it made them cry. Others said it inspired them to call their grandparents or spend more time with loved ones. The old woman sat quietly, shocked. She never imagined that the moment she played with the girl on that cold morning would travel so far. She had thought it was only a small piece of her life, a moment that would disappear like all the others. but now it was touching people she had never met. The woman from the center then told her that many people were asking about them. Some wanted to donate to help them. Some wanted to support the Arts Center so more children and seniors could learn music. A few even asked if the old woman would be willing to perform again. This time in a real event, the old woman covered her mouth with her hand. She could not believe people had such interest in them. She had lived most of her life in quiet corners, unnoticed and forgotten. She did not know how to stand in such light. But before she could speak, the girl ran to her, climbed onto her lap, and wrapped her arms around her. That small gesture told her everything she needed to know. She was no longer alone. The center decided to host a special community concert. It would not be fancy or loud. It would simply be an evening where students, teachers, and neighbors came together to celebrate music and togetherness. They asked the old woman and the girl if they would be willing to perform a small duet again. The old woman hesitated. She felt nervous about performing in front of people. She worried her hands might shake. She worried she might forget the notes. But when she looked at the girl's excited eyes, she knew she had to try. This moment was not just for her. It was for the little girl who had followed her through cold nights, empty days, and long walks with nothing but hope. The days leading up to the concert were busy. The center buzzed with preparation. Children practiced dance routines. Older students rehearsed their songs. Some helped hang decorations. Others carried chairs and arranged the space. Everyone wanted the evening to be special. The old woman practiced quietly with the girl whenever they had time. They didn't try to make their performance perfect. They simply played with the same warmth they shared in the park. That was enough. That was always enough. The girl was excited every time they practiced. She would tap the keys with joy, sometimes adding an extra note by accident, which made them both laugh. The old woman would gently guide her hand, helping her find the right key, and the girl would beam with pride when she got it right. Finally, the evening of the concert arrived. The center's hall filled slowly with people, families, students, neighbors, volunteers. Some had heard of the event from the video circulating online. Others simply loved the center and wanted to support it. The old woman and the girl watched from backstage. The old woman held the girl's hand tightly, feeling her heartbeat race. Her own heartbeat was not steady either, but she took a deep breath and reminded herself that she was not performing for the world. She was performing for the girl. Always for the girl. One by one, performances began. Young singers took the stage. A group of children played recorders. A teen played a quiet violin solo that made the room fall silent. A dance group performed a simple but heartfelt routine. The hall was full of warmth, clapping, and appreciation. Then it was their turn. The woman from the center introduced them with a gentle voice, explaining briefly how their journey had brought them to the center and how their story had touched so many hearts. She did not share details that would make them uncomfortable, just enough for people to understand the meaning behind the moment. The old woman stepped onto the stage slowly, holding the girl's hand. The girl waved shyly at the audience, making a few people smile. They sat together at the piano bench. The lights were soft. The hall was quiet. The old woman's hands trembled at first, but when she looked at the girl beside her, she found strength. She placed her fingers on the keys. The girl did the same. The first note rang out softly, then another. Soon the gentle tune flowed through the room, simple and warm. The girl followed the old woman's lead, playing her part with innocence and joy. The audience watched with deep emotion. Some leaned forward. Some closed their eyes. Some held hands. It was not a grand performance. It was not perfect. But it was real. It was full of heart. When the last note faded into the air, the room remained silent for a moment, as if holding its breath. Then applause broke out soft at first, then stronger, rising like a wave. Some people stood. Some wiped their eyes. The old woman felt tears gather in her own eyes, but she smiled, pulling the girl close. They bowed together, hand in hand. After the performance, people came to greet them. Some thanked the old woman. Some hugged the girl gently. Some offered soft words of support. The old woman felt overwhelmed by the kindness, but also deeply grateful. Later that night, after the concert ended and the crowd had left, the old woman and the girl walked back to their small room in the center. The hallways were quiet. The girl hummed the tune they played. Skipping a little with each step, the old woman walked slowly behind her, watching her with tender eyes. She thought about the long road that had brought them here, the struggles, the cold nights, the loneliness, the hunger, the moments when she feared life had nothing left to offer. But now, they had warmth, they had people who cared, they had a place where they belonged, and most importantly, they had music. That night, as she tucked the girl into bed, the old woman whispered something she had not said in years. She whispered that they were home. The girl, half asleep, smiled and held her hand. And in that soft glow of the quiet room, the old woman finally felt peace deep in her heart. Their journey had been long and heavy, but it had led them to a place where love lived, where music healed, and where two souls who once had nothing now had everything they needed, a new beginning, a safe place, and a future filled with hope.